Hey everyone, welcome to the Environmental Justice Collaborative Governance Committee, EJCGC's May 2023 meeting. Today we have my cat on my lap and we have guest speakers from the city of Sacramento. I'm going to be talking about the climate action and adaptation plan, as well as the general plan update, as well as climate implementation in general at the city level. Also a general reminder, as always included in all our emails, the EJCGC is not itself part of the city of Sacramento. So this is not a city of Sacramento space, but more so a space where we're inviting city of Sacramento staff members as guest speakers to talk about some updates that they have to share with us. I'm gonna maybe go ahead and pass it off to Jennifer and Vic, but before I do, I'll kind of preface with, we'll do one presentation, probably Q&A space, and then the next presentation, and then Q&A again, overall for the kind of whole event. And that's kind of our content for today's evening. We don't have that much other than these two obviously very important and hefty presentations, and I think we'll dive right in. Over to you, Jennifer and Vic.
Thanks, Moise. So we'll do our introductions. Happy to be here with folks tonight. I know it's been a long time since I've been to the EJCGC, not since the Wednesday meeting. So it's great to see some old commission members and other familiar faces. So my name is Jennifer Venema. I'm the City of Sacramento's Climate Action Lead. I've been in that position about 2.5 years, and I'm here tonight with my colleague from the city, Vic Randall. I'll let Vic do his introduction in a moment. And just to build on what Moise said, we're here today and happy to provide an update on the city's climate action work. So first, you're going to hear from Vic about those mid to long-term facing planning efforts. The Climate Action and Adaptation Plan is part of the general plan. And just what's important as well is the implementation piece, which we haven't waited to get started on. So after Vic walks us through the overall plans that have now been released and the process before those are finalized, I'll then present the update on our implementation status and some of those highlights of what we're doing in the meantime, even as plan development has been ongoing. So we'll love to hear from folks in between our presentations. Just with that context that Vic will start with the big picture and the plans, and then I'll come next as it relates to some of the specific efforts underway. So with that, Vic, I'll turn it over to you for an intro and to dive in.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. So as Jennifer noted, my name is Vic Randall. I'm a senior planner in the long-range planning team in our community development department, and part of a small team that's focused on climate and sustainability planning. So working on projects like our climate action and adaptation plan, a couple of the new building electrification ordinance and existing building electrification strategy are projects that I and my team are working on. So we're happy to be with you tonight. I'm going to be focused primarily on the climate action and adaptation plan and share a little bit of background and information on the overall general plan, our Sacramento 2040 process, which includes the general plan update. But I won't go into much detail on the general plan tonight, but rather just focus on the climate action and adaptation plan. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen and walk you through a little presentation that we have. There we go. Myself set up here. So again, happy to provide this overview of the CAP tonight. Both the CAP, shorthand for Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, and our general plan were released for public review at the end of April. And this is part of a long process that led us to this point, starting with some general plan policies in 2009 that really embraced climate action. And then the city's first climate action plans were completed in 2010 with an internal operations cap, and 2012 with community-wide cap. And then the cap was incorporated into the 2035 general plan. And now we have our standalone climate action and adaptation plan, which integrates a vulnerability assessment and adaptation chapter. And we've created a standalone document for your review. There's been quite a bit of work that's, my apologies, let me get caught up here with my slideshow. So there's been quite a bit of work that's already been done leading up to this point, and now also within the scope of this project. So the city released a preliminary public review draft climate action plan, so just cap the climate action piece in July of 2022. Subsequently released the preliminary draft vulnerability assessment and adaptation chapter in October of 2022. And now we've released the full cap, full public review cap on April 28th. So some highlights on the cap include that Sacramento has achieved a 20% reduction in our community-wide emissions between 2005 and 2016, 2016 being our most recent greenhouse gas inventory. And then the city itself has achieved a 28% reduction in municipal greenhouse gas emissions in that time. So our Sacramento's 2030 target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is 63% below 1990 levels per capita. And then our 2045 target is to reduce emissions to net zero. So achieving that 100% below 1990 levels. There we go. So our community-wide emissions for 2016 are estimated to be 3.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. As you can see from this diagram, 57% of Sacramento's greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. The building sector makes up roughly 37% of overall emissions. Building sector emissions come primarily from energy that's used within buildings for heating, air conditioning, lighting, and plug load. And 4% of our community emissions are generated from waste, and about 1% come from pumping water and wastewater for the community. So this is my colleague Helen Self's one of her favorite slides, and I like to reflect Helen's work. She's been a lead in our climate action planning for quite some time. She's not with us tonight, but just want to acknowledge the great work that she's done and continues to do. So just want to note that local governments do not directly control community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, but we do have some jurisdictional authority over some things that can be used as levers to change the built environment or facilitate behavior changes that reduce carbon emissions. And some of those key levers available include that local governments have authority over building permits and can make local amendments to the building code to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. We can use tools such as the general plan and planning and development code to change the standards for new development, such as parking ratios, or to change land use patterns, which is certainly the case with our general plan now, to increase the mixed use density and intensity of new development to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and buildings over time. Local governments can also make changes in the way services are delivered. For example, requiring separate bins for yard waste and other organics so that organics can be diverted from landfills. And then finally, our Public Works Department is responsible for transportation infrastructure investments such as local streets, bikeways, and sidewalks. And the city can make changes to transportation infrastructure such as removing vehicle travel lanes and adding bike lanes. Transportation infrastructure changes can potentially change travel behavior and result in mode shift that reduces greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. And this is an important lever for the city. So our projections looking forward at 2030, we've projected where we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from these various sectors. And I'll go ahead and walk you through the 10 quantified measures to give you a little bit of sense of how we plan to get to our 2030 targets and set ourselves on the path to our 2045 goal of net zero. So top of the list is really SMUD's zero carbon plan, which commits to 100% zero carbon electricity by 2030. This is projected to contribute about 47% of the community greenhouse gas reductions that are identified in the CAP. This is also the basis of the CAP's most impactful greenhouse gas emission reduction measures. And the city is working with SMUD closely to facilitate the shift to carbon-free power for both buildings and vehicles. The second most impactful measure is TR3 to support zero emission vehicle adoption. And the city can take actions to ensure that Sacramento has adequate charging infrastructure. This measure is anticipated to provide about 17% of our community greenhouse gas reductions by 2030. And it will be necessary for the city to achieve a 28% ZEV registration rate by 2030 and 100% by 2045 to meet these targets. And I'll just note that in 2022, approximately 17% of new cars sold in California were zero emission vehicles, indicating that there is some real momentum to reach this target. And existing building electrification is projected to provide about 10% of our community greenhouse gas emission reductions through 2030. And the city is in process right now in developing a long-term strategy to transition existing buildings to electric. This has been a long process, and there's still some work ahead, some wrinkles that we're dealing with at this point in time, but feel very, very good and positive about the context that we have to work with in Sacramento, including our partner at SMUD, our relatively affordable electricity rates, and that commitment again from SMUD to go to net zero by 2030. So we'll have more information on that project. We'll roll out to the community this summer. And then organic waste disposal. So working to reduce organic waste disposal by 75% by 2025 from 2014 numbers is projected to provide about 11% of our total greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030. So public transit and shared transportation have the potential to decrease vehicle miles traveled by 15% by 2030 by shifting mode share away from cars to public transit and shared transportation. So this measure includes working with SAC-RT to increase the frequency, convenience, and reach of transit. The city's role in partnership with RT is to support transit priority corridors with things like roadway reallocations and to provide travel lanes for bus rapid transit and traffic signal priority for transit. There we go. And electrification of new construction, excuse me, is projected to contribute about 3% of overall community greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030. Increasing tree canopy from the current 19% to 35% by 2045 is another strategy that's been identified to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, it provides many other benefits such as shade and cooling. So also looking at active transportation and prioritizing a mode shift from cars to active transportation. And this involves improving bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And the CAP prioritizes active transportation to achieve a 6% mode share by 2030 and a 12% mode share by 2045. And the general plan supports this by proposing roadway lane reallocations to prioritize walking, biking, and transit over automobiles. And then our final measure is water and wastewater decarbonization. These account for about a little over 1% of community greenhouse gas emission reductions at this point. This will involve utilizing carbon-free energy to pump water, encouraging efficient use of water, and recovering biogas from wastewater. And then again, we noted that the CAP, this CAP includes a climate change vulnerability assessment, which analyzes the projected effects of climate change in Sacramento over the course of the 21st century. So the VA, or vulnerability assessment, considered key climate change effects, including temperature increase, changes in precipitation, increased wildfire and air quality impacts, and increased flooding. Sacramento is expected to experience a range of impacts, including increases in the number of extreme rain events per year, increases in the average number of heat waves per year, and increases in the average number of extreme heat days per year. Take this opportunity. Okay, and then as well, the CAP includes the identification of adaptation goals. So we've identified 6 primary adaptation goals, and these goals are supported by a suite of policies and actions identified in both the general plan and local hazard mitigation plan, as well as some policies and actions that are specific to the CAP. So again, these 6 adaptation goals are strengthening city government capacity for integrated holistic climate adaptive strategies to reduce climate risks, creating built environments that reduce exposure to extreme heat and mitigate urban heat island effect, reducing the risk of damage to life infrastructure and property due to flooding, increasing awareness of and expanding community resources to address the adverse health effects of air pollution, increasing community resilience to prepare for climate impacts, and enhancing water supply diversification and prioritizing water use efficiency to build resilience to the effects of climate change. So I'd like to just give you a quick primer to our online, self-guided online workshop, which is our primary pathway for reviewing both the general plan and the climate action and adaptation plan. And it's meant to be an easy forum, both to review the documents and to provide comments. And we've got a couple of different opportunities to do so. So you can find the self-guided online workshop through the project website at sac2040gpu.org. If you can click on the button that is titled Enter Self-Guided Online Workshop, and it'll get you there. There is a great 6-minute introductory video, which I highly recommend. A great overview of both the general plan and the CAP. And you're welcome to go to the stations all in order, or skip around, or just visit the ones that you find most have most interest in. And these are set up with both an introductory board, so one or two page board, which gives you a higher level overview of the content, the goals, and the key moves of the element. Or in the case of the CAP, it's the adaptation of the greenhouse gas mitigation measures, and the adaptation goals are highlighted. And then at the end of each station is a space where you can leave comment based on those boards, or you can get into the station, and just to note that they are available in both Chinese and Spanish. And then if you want to get into the details of the CAP or any of the general plan elements, there's a link at the bottom to access the full document. And then you can leave specific comments at the location of, let me go ahead and bring this in so you can see. I'll give you a quick primer here, quick walkthrough. So this is our project website. So just here we go. We've got our Enter Self-Guided Online Workshop. Just to note, we've got the full documents, the general plan and the CAP available on the site. In addition, we've got proposed 2040 general plan land use and development standards interactive map, which is very useful and easy way to understand the proposed changes in land use. We've got our schedule for webinars. We have 2 left. I'll give you a little more information on that, and a series of upcoming meetings. But as you get into the self-guided workshop, again, here's our introductory video. I highly recommend watching that. And then you've got each of the stations set up here. You can access any that you want. And I'll take you into the environmental justice element. And as this loads, you have access to the introductory board, which gives you a quick primer of the nature of the document. And then you can click here to comment, or you can click here to go into the full document. And I think I'll leave it at that for now, and bring you back here to wrap up the presentation. So I also want to note that we do have, let's see. So that we do have 3 orientation webinars. So we've had one on May 10th. We have another coming up on June 6th at 10 a.m. And then we'll have a third one on June 29th at 5:30 p.m. And the webinars are really intended to be parallel, more or less the same information, really give you an overview of the online workshop, how to access it, key moves from both the general plan and the CAP. And then there'll be additional opportunities to learn more through a range of commission and council meetings that we have upcoming. We'll have presentations focused primarily on the general plan, but also some of the CAP. Our big policy presentations will be at Planning and Design Commission. So if you want to look at June 8th commission meeting, we'll have a detailed presentation on the general plan. And the June 22nd meeting will include a detailed presentation on the CAP policies and actions. And so just to note also, our next steps, we will be conducting a bunch of pop-up outreach at festivals and markets over the course of the summer. We'll have additional press releases, social media content, and email blasts that come out at key milestones. And then we'll be releasing the Master Environmental Impact Report in a few months at late summer. And then finally, just to note, the self-guided online workshop is going to be open through August. So you do have a few months. We recognize this is an awful lot of information that's being rolled out at one time. Both documents are roughly 550 pages. So there's quite a bit of content to get through. But you do have a long window to review at your leisure and provide comment. And we really do encourage you, to spread the word as you have the time. We look forward to hearing your comments. And then just finally to note that our city council hearings and adoption hearings are scheduled tentatively for early 2024. So with that overview, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Vic, and perhaps we'll pause here for initial questions or comments. Again, this is an overview of really big documents. And as you all know here, we've been working on these a long time. And so excited to have the drafts out and really looking forward to feedback and comments. And so we want to take questions and address what we can here. I'll first call out Lori's comment in the chat regarding dependence on SMUD's zero carbon by 2030 plan and what we're doing to help SMUD achieve that goal. With SMUD doing the heavy lifting, what else will the city do to speed up the timeline to achieve carbon zero, 2045 being too late? So I'll start that, and Vic, you can jump in. So I think this, I want to point to here that slide that Vic shared in terms of the city's role. So the city plays an important role in a lot of ways, but we cannot directly or unilaterally change every building's fossil fuel source in the city. What we are doing is exercising our regulatory authority where we can. So for example, with the adoption of the new building electrification ordinance, developing a policy for how we get there in existing buildings. As you saw in the slides that Vic shared, those in and of themselves are not the largest reduction measures by 2030 or even 2045, but those are measures that we can enact through our regulatory abilities with land use and building code. So that's why those were critical steps. Those were also elevated and prioritized for the city coming out of the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change. And so again, SMUD's provision of clean power is a critical part of how the region as a whole will achieve greenhouse gas reductions, but also the efficacy and really the impact of it is minimized if most of our buildings continue to use gas and if most of our cars continue to use gas. So that's why electrification of transportation and buildings is key, even as we work really aggressively and actively on active transportation and supporting transit. Those are expensive capital improvement projects that take a lot of time. And so those are continuing to advance, but they're more challenging to, again, through our current structures, achieve. And so really welcome everyone's creative ideas and suggestions, and recognizing that the city in and of itself may not be able to, again, unilaterally enact those. A big part of this is partnership and how we move forward together. So Vic, would you like to add your thoughts there?
Well, no, I think you covered that very well, Jennifer. I would just add a note that both the CAP and general plan contain policy direction to focus future development in the city center and along our transit corridors. So that really is a key piece to really creating the environment in which those active transportation and transit investments really are functional and viable and will lead to mode shift.
Stephen, your hand's up. Do you want to jump in first?
Sure. So the purpose of this Q&A is to have us react to the presentation, essentially, just to clarify.
We welcome what you'd like to share. And again, here, main goal here is we want to make sure everyone's aware. Everyone's been eagerly anxious for this. So if you have questions or general comments, we would welcome those.
Sure. Just, I guess, as a brief point of order, can I ask how much time I have? Because I have a lot to say.
Moise, what do you?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Steve, maybe one or two questions or statements, just trying to recognize that we also have the second presentation and a couple other hands raised.
Okay, yeah, feel free to cut me off. I won't feel bad, but yeah, I guess in terms of reactions, I had a few different thoughts. First, I think I don't know, it was a little off-putting for me coming into this environmental justice space, and the words equity and environmental justice have not been mentioned at this point to date. So I do find that a little bit troubling as far as contextualizing the presentation. We've already had a number of presentations in relation to the CAP of where this information has been presented. So just to zoom in on that, I guess reading through the document, I would have liked to have seen a lot more in terms of equity criteria. You say on page 49 that the city will have equity protections to avoid unintended consequences from policies and programs to address climate change. And this is the same equity guardrail thinking that we flagged and you all committed to taking out. And, you know, it's to the point where we have lectured you about needing to change your thinking, and you said you would. So I'm disappointed that the document doesn't reflect this thinking. And basically, when it comes to equity, it's kind of punted to the implementation phase. There's other quotes that I don't have time to get into, but basically you're telling us you'll figure out how to implement these things, these reduction measures later on down the road. I think the development of implementation procedures needs to be done through a public process that ensures that low-income people and people of color are not just able to have a seat at the table, but play a leading role in the development of these procedures. The whole thing must be guided by the wishes of the communities these policies are going to have an effect in. And so basically this means that the implementation procedures are going to be analyzed with this lens of avoiding causing further harm, is what is stated in the document. But it's got to be a lot bigger than that. I think, you know, you've acknowledge the potential for harm, but aren't proposing community-driven solutions that would mitigate those harms, solutions that enable the community to play a deciding role about what their communities should look like. Addressing structural inequity involves providing additional benefits and going above and beyond to get it to the point where these communities have an equitable distribution of the benefits that these measures aim to achieve. So certainly, yes, it means doing everything in your power to prevent already overburdened communities from facing additional harms, but it's also about actively unburdening communities as well, providing benefits to them to repair the structural inequities that they continue to face. And I know I have to wrap it up here, but I guess my last point is that, as Lori mentioned in the chat, you know, we will breach 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2027. So we have to get serious and treat this issue like an emergency. We're not hitting the 2030 target. We're not even hitting the 2045 target. And I know you're going to say, oh, well, we don't have enough money. And my reply to you is, well, then you need to find the money. And perhaps the police department is a great place to start. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate your feedback. And I will just note
I think
here.
I'll actually jump in, Jennifer. I think to the first part of your comments, Stephen, as far as the kind of topic of tonight's presentation, that was, we've had in this space presentations from the city before. At least for tonight specifically, I did kind of ask, as far as like the timely matter, like the general plan, climate action and adaptation plan release, as like the very newly released topics. Those were the presentations that I had reached out to Jennifer a while back to present on tonight. And so it was like an overall presentation, not a presentation on the specific environmental justice element or any other specific pieces. Again, a super high level presentation just on. And I mean, like this space really isn't in advocacy space, it's more an update space. And as far as like advocacy, super big of fan of that, and think there are like public comment spaces and like the self-guided workshops that the city has. We'll leave it to Jennifer and Vic to add anything else if they want to. Also seeing that we have Nick and Emilio on comment, and we can circle back to those comments as well if folks have things to add.
Thank you, Moise. And I'll just, very briefly note, as you noted, the intent here in this open format for a broader participation in this meeting was to make sure everyone had that same level of playing field of information, and acknowledge what you said, Stephen, and a lot of the opportunities for how we move forward. I would really encourage you, and we welcome, please put any of these comments in writing via those tools where you have feedback on budget allocations. Again, we're mindful of staff working to incorporate all of that, but those are decisions for our city council. Specifically to the equity guardrails versus actionable equity criteria, I would just note that how we look at equity really varies based on any one of the issues or initiatives. And as it relates to existing building electrification, where we talked about the equity guardrails with the EJCGC, I would point folks to workshops we had earlier this year about the updated approach, where we've changed the framing and we're focused there really on criteria instead of the notion of guardrails, really reflecting a lot of the feedback from this group, which we heard loud and clear, trying to implement holistic projects as well. So maybe I'll stop there. We'll go to Nick, but I'll drop a link in the chat to the existing building electrification page where there's some more specific examples where equity is put forward.
And the one other thing I'll add, as far as the kind of discussion we've already started to get into, and I appreciate the kind of forethinking of folks present here, because that's of course relevant. The climate implementation piece and like strategies for how to implement, especially given budget constraints and trying to find money and make projects happen on the ground and in the streets and not just on paper. That's the second half. But quickly we'll pass to Nick and then Emilio.
I'll just say thanks to Vic and Jennifer. I think we have 7 to 8 months left of some of this process, so excited to dig in. I think for me, as I think about it for my day job and in the evening working on this stuff, is I really like to see, which I think you've already started, a prioritization on our multifamily and kind of how that could be a real linchpin for getting most bang for our buck for the money we're spending and changing behavior. I think a lot of us, millennials included, we're starting off as renters, so we get that behavior and we're going to kind of carry that on. And I think that matches the city's focus to build in the city center. So when I think about things like 1383 implementation, other types of multimodal implementation, I think directing a lot of the city's limited resources to multifamily, I think will be a critical prioritization along the way. Because I think you get, hundreds of homes all at once, and you get us trained and moving forward. So that would be my comment for now, and then I look forward to hearing with Jennifer. I'm sure she has a lot of thoughts on that. Thank you. Thanks, Vic.
Thank you, Nick. And I'll just note that you'll find a lot of supportive policies in the general plan, and then also just to note that the city is working on a missing middle study as well, which is another tool that will guide future planning and development code amendments that would be supportive of housing densification. So, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Emilio.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Vic and Jennifer. I just downloaded the draft climate action plan and noticed that it's pretty lengthy. I was wondering if, something that I'm interested in is, echoing some of the comments in the chat, we are on a tight timeline here for getting climate change right. And I'm interested if there's anything in the plan about kind of milestones to assess our progress towards our goals and opportunities to recalibrate. If you could point me to that section or of where those might live. Would love a chance to comment on those in writing.
Yeah, so I'll start by pointing you to Chapter 8. And there is an implementation timeline. And just to note that we are proposing to update the cap on the same schedule as the general plan, which is typically on a 5-year schedule. What that means is that we would begin that update process in 2027 with the goal of adopting again in 2030. So we'd have a few years of active implementation to learn from, and then begin that process again. And we do see a lot of moving parts, both in on the technology front, on the legal framework, and then just as the community evolves and grows, we'll be able to refine our direction as well. So.
Just to add to that, you'll see in that chapter as well commitments to the ongoing monitoring. And so really looking at overall GHG emissions. As part of this overall package, we do have some specific key indicators as well as additional indicators for cap measures. And that's in, I think, Vic, Appendix C, or maybe that's in the reduction measure chapter. And those are items that we'll be tracking with tools of the city. And that's kind of an ongoing conversation. We'd love to come back here as well in terms of how do we track and evaluate progress in a manner that's public and engages feedback as we report it out.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Great, we'll let, if there's any other folks that would like to jump in here, additional questions on this item, feel free to unmute as I'm pulling up the second slides. Right. Well, I will get started with this second part of the presentation here. So as Moise noted, we have the climate action plan and the general plan, and what I'm going to touch on here are some of the highlights from our most recent quarterly update to the City Council of the status of our climate action implementation. We presented these updates to the City Council on May 2nd, but wanted to provide an annotated update here and to help paint that picture and to Nick's point and interest of what we've been doing in the midst of developing these longer term policies and initiatives. And really 3 parts to this, just touching, we've heard context already. I'll be very brief on the context, but then speaking to the tasks underway and really some of the resource needs and in the context of the longer term gaps towards overall climate action plan implementation. As folks know here, with a lot of engagement in recent years, much of that input culminated with the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change, which elevated those, again, key actions for the city to implement. I think you all are very familiar with this. As it relates to what the city is implementing, though, it's important to note that city staff, we're working off of work plans and council direction that prioritized items coming out of the Mayor's Climate Commission, and also adopted policies, which set the foundation for draft policies in the general plan and a real evaluation of the organization. And that was informed by work of the city auditor. So we pulled kind of all of these recent efforts and recommendations, plus directed clear guidance and kind of directives from the City Council into the near term 2021 climate work plan, which is really those early action priority items that I've talked about with the EJCGC before. And secondly, that's also informed the, again, longer term cap, which we just discussed as part of the overall general plan framework. For those tasks, the list of the to-do items from that work plan has evolved, but it falls within 3 buckets as we first presented to council last year. So it's kind of the internal pieces of how we build capacity at the city. My job, part of my job as the climate action lead, is to really try to make climate part of everyone's job, and police budget versus climate capital improvement projects. I'll just note here, really interesting call I had earlier today was convened by our chief of police to connect me to a researcher from University of Georgia or Mississippi wanting to do adaptation research. So even though, you know, there's these big traditional buckets of what the city does, I just really want to emphasize that we're all trying to be as creative as we can to find those resources, and we have support from public safety to other departments across the city. The second part of it is how we can really seed broader action. The city has a critical role to play. We've put a lot of the stimulus money we've received coming out of COVID-19 directly into the community, and a lot of that funding is drying up. So part of it is figuring out how we can be strategic with the limited resources at the city, bring in new funding from the state and federal government, but also help our partners as we do this more broadly, working better with community, learning with community, delivering for our community, and also with our other agency partners, including SMUD, which I can give some examples. The third bucket are those strategic efforts. We've already touched tonight on building electrification. That was a priority item elevated by council and supported by funding, as well as a number of other items. We have active transportation, evaluations, and planning efforts underway, specifically for some of our priority high need communities throughout Sacramento. So out of the work plan, we have a number of items underway. 3 of these items are complete. There's a couple that we have started, but have really hit delays too, because partially I want to note we're trying to listen and do things well as it relates to the discussion for equity. One of these items we've started but have been delayed on is the climate equity pilot. We had a number of listening sessions and interviews, learning how we can be most effective with a small pot of funding for climate outreach. And really what we heard from folks was that things like stop talking, do the work, remove barriers, give the money to organizations, like those were some of the key takeaways we heard. Why are we delayed on this? Because people have said it's hard to contract with the city. And so we released an RFP as advised by many stakeholders to try and bring an administrator on board to essentially simplify the process. And we've done this for youth grants, for example, but there's a lot more money directed explicitly for youth. And we didn't get any responses to our RFP. So again, small pot of climate money. And that is an area that's delayed because we're trying to take an equity-oriented community approach, moving quickly. What we're trying to do now is pivot and figure out how we can bring in more money from grants to make this more attractive and get an administrator to streamline engagement with community groups. But that's ongoing. And in the meantime, there's been other grants that we're trying to meet deadlines for. And there's a lot that's moving forward. Happy to give more detail on any of these, but the main story is that with this 4.4 million, really we've taken some critical steps. And I think part of what we're really trying to do at the city is keep the work moving, communicate it out better and more holistically, and at the same time use it to bring in more resources. Just a few of the highlights of things that are underway as they relate to and fall under this broad climate environmental justice portfolio includes things from implementation of requirements for all electric buildings. Over 40 all electric buildings have been permitted since January. It's not with city dollars, not built by a public CIP. These are private buildings that are electric because of the rules we've adopted. We're also one of the few cities to adopt standards for mandatory on-site water reuse for large projects. One of the few in the nation, actually, and kicking off phase 2 of that effort to look at increasing those standards. And also, we're opportunistic. The city received significant funding through the state's Clean California grants, doing work like green alleyway improvements and beautification in neighborhoods like Dixie Ann and Old North Sacramento, and advancing the Sacramento Active Transportation Plan, which will compile old planning efforts, as well as advance planning for communities lacking some of these plans, like Meadowview neighborhood and North Sacramento, Lemon Hill areas. So lots underway with the council's 4.4 million investment just in the last 2 or so years. In that same amount of time, we've brought in over $76 million of external funds. And this has been in partnership, including partnership with SMUD, where we've worked for over $400,000 of competitive grants to electrify low-income homes. And that's one I'm really excited to make sure you all are aware of from our talk with the EJCGC. Tenant protections, neighborhood stabilization were some key themes. So we have about 27 low-income homeowners throughout the Stockton Boulevard, Aggie Square area that these grants will directly subsidize, putting in heat pumps while other city dollars are doing other home rehabilitation improvements. This also includes competitive grants for active transportation. We won money for other types of initiatives, including outreach, creative outreach that includes climate as a priority. Plus, as I mentioned, the Clean California grant, $16 million. And there's a lot underway. Kicking off workforce that's climate focused with youth. So we're really excited. And again, I know it's frustrating and the city budget process can be very opaque and challenging to engage in. And what we're really working at, and it takes time, is to try and, again, better report out, collect these numbers. We don't have an automated report to run these things, but really trying to help share this story more broadly of what we are doing and use it, again, to be more successful at bringing in a creative array of sources. In addition, the city also is leading the region and really bearing a lot of the responsibilities for significant transformational investments that I'm really excited to see some of this built out in my lifetime. For the Sacramento Valley Station, working with regional partners, rail partners, bus partners, we've secured an additional $68 million just in the last 2 years to build out a regional intermodal bus connectivity facility. This is to build out the first certified living community vision plan by a municipality at Sacramento Valley Station, and to really advance dense multifamily mixed use development. And so this is not just for the city, but to some of Nick's points, these are significant shifts in land use, and it's going to enable reductions in highway travel. And this doesn't come from an existing department budget. These are outside funds we've worked with our partners to bring in. And this is exciting work, very exciting work. So we've done a lot altogether, going through those various buckets. That's about $149 million in the last 2-ish years since the Mayor's Climate Commission wrapped. So it's a lot, like way more than council gave us, right? We've brought in a lot, we've leveraged local dollars and been highly successful. Overall, the Climate Action Plan in Appendix D indicates at least $3 billion of unfunded costs for the city to figure out how to fund just to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and get to carbon neutrality for things like the transportation, capital improvement projects, maintaining a broader urban canopy of 35% tree coverage, things along those lines. It doesn't capture the full cost of additional things like enhancing preparation for impacts, new climate risks. The storms in the early part of this year, I think, were a great illustration of cascading risks and vulnerabilities that aren't fully reflected in this number, nor does this capture the costs of RT's expansion of transit, which is critical. So this is a first step, but it's an important step. And if you weren't listening to the city council meeting, it's something that our council has prioritized and indicated, like, they understand this is their responsibility to figure out long-term needs. And that's where everyone's engagement and input is critical. We've got the information out there. These will be ongoing conversations as we work to finalize the Climate Action Plan. And I would point you here to Appendix D, where we have done analysis on the GHG mitigation side. So as you heard from Vic, we have documents online. We would really encourage folks to comment on these documents. If you'd like to have us come back to speak more about the climate action and adaptation plan, we'd be happy to. We've got several months here. There's a lot to get through. As this is solidified and direction is confirmed with City Council, the next steps for us is to really align our resources, revisit our implementation work plans, and identify those key points of where is the biggest impact for the city. How do we work together and continue to really move as fast as we can towards these goals, recognizing the urgency that's needed and all that we have to do to adapt our existing systems. So with that, don't hesitate to reach out. If you want to see our quarterly reports, you can see those on our climate action website, cityofsacramento.org/climate action, and I'll drop that in the chat. So thank you. Let me stop there for questions.
I'll jump in and say, thank you to Jennifer again and Vic for that presentation. I think just thinking holistically about the space, environmental justice space, and some of the comments that have also been said tonight in the chat and stuff. I've been thinking a lot about, creating some priorities, right? We have a $3 billion kind of budget deficiting away for the climate issues. And I think to the extent where our community is really focused, at least from this space, is the prioritization of human life and protection and adaptation, making sure that what we're spending the critical dollars we do have is first and foremost thinking about who will be hurt first by a rising tide or 24 consecutive days of heat waves. And I think that's where we really build community consensus around taking action. I know we have some pretty big projects to map out and to fund, but I think one of the things that our big documents is trying to make sure that we're prioritizing, making sure that folks can live another day and see another generation. I mean, I think it's a big. I know you all value that as well, but I guess throughout, I think it's something you'll hear from us is where on the kind of Maslow's pyramid of needs is this action and is this dollar being spent? And so I think that's what you're seeing. I think that will intersect with so many things in our community. And so that's kind of what the tenor of my discussions and the comments will be like throughout the next 9 months. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate that. Stephen, looks like you're next.
Perfect. Thanks for that presentation, Jennifer. I want to zero in on Nick's point as well. The presentation mentioned we need, $3 billion to achieve the mitigation measures that already don't even meet the 2045 net zero timeline. And I'll just say as a side note that I think everyone taking this seriously knows that 2045 is already way too late. So I think, that is something important to certainly flag for council, that it's going to require, billions of dollars, and that we need to be doing everything in our power as the city to try to come up and try to alleviate that shortfall. And I want to echo on Nick's point as well, that funding should be directed to the entities already experiencing disproportionate climate impacts first. So, and another point is that if communities are having trouble, and it sounds like they are or were, interfacing with the contract and the grant application process, potentially a third party could assist where, they can arrange for things like if meetings are held, people's bus fare can be subsidized. There can be childcare and other amenities offered to kind of lower the activation energy required to participate in this public process. So my last point is basically just to touch on the green alleyway and beautification. I just hope that that doesn't entail doing sweeps of the unhoused under the banner of environmental justice. So I hope there are deliberate efforts in place to kind of address those considerations.
Thank you.
A little weird, two screens. Yeah, I saw some videos about, I think the city of LA's green alleyways program, and they look promising. But echo Stephen's point there about making sure that that doesn't come at the expense of someone else's safety and security. I think maybe a large theme of this conversation and this whole night has been kind of this point about obviously this huge like climate deficit as we talk about the need to fund. And I think I'm curious, like the process for the city budget, I know is something that many folks are engaged with, that there are lots of considerations and no specific department necessarily has executive control. That's more a city manager consideration. And maybe going into those conversations as far as like, how do we make sure that climate is funded? I think the transportation priorities plan as a model of here's the map, here's what we could fund, and why aren't we funding X, Y, or Z? Like those are obviously hard conversations to have, but I think in looking at the way that the transportation priorities plan played out, was an important conversation to have, and I think could serve as a good model for taking that to council and presenting, here are things that we could be funding, and having those potentially participatory budgeting conversations of like, how do people in our community care about these different things, and how are we weighing those, especially as budgets are of course statements of our priorities as a city. So hopefully, not really closing on a question, but kind of thinking about this as like an opportunity for us as people in the community, as advocates, as city staff, to kind of leverage each of our unique roles in coming to council maybe more powerfully and more effectively in the future.
Thanks for your comments, Moise. And just a couple quick notes from me related to the budget. I want to be respectful if folks need to go. I know we're at 7. Don't hesitate. We are in the midst of the city's budget season, and so that is a process where all departments submitted proposals way back late last year, and that all gets vetted through the budget department and city manager to determine which items can move forward. And this year, largely the new items that are moving forward are those that don't have new costs to the budget. So those items coming forward are offset with other savings or revenue or realignment of positions, for example. And we continue to engage on our side through the avenues we have to really advocate for prioritizing sustainability and climate. The challenge is there's not really new funding to allocate. So these are discussions of our council, and on the first budget and audit committee meeting, it was last Tuesday. This was an item of discussion. I'd encourage folks to listen to that topic. I expect the council will continue to discuss it in the next meetings. Let's see, May 16th or at May 23rd. I think that June 13th is the anticipated adoption date of the budget, and there may be a May 30th budget and audit committee meeting. Those agendas get published tomorrow. So, check it out. Ongoing item of discussion. We know equity is something that the prior council had elevated to ensure there's tools to evaluate budget decisions, and internally we're working on talking about how do we include climate as well, but with the recognition that there's not new resources largely to go around. So would just encourage folks to monitor that and to continue, as Moise said, to do your part, weigh in, and we'll continue to do the same on our side.
And maybe actually also a final note, just wearing my climate plan hat. One of the things that we've been following and advocating for and making happen at the state level is the SB 150 report, or the California Climate Progress Report. And we're expecting the state and the Air Resources Board to release the final draft of that latest report, which was supposed to be out last year. But at least the draft was released last year, and I think the final one should be released shortly. And it has recommendations for metropolitan planning organizations, cities, small agencies, as far as reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions and how to do that, especially at the regional level. And we'll kind of point folks to that, whether you are a city staff member looking for things to put in a plan, or a community member looking for things to advocate for as far as solutions. Yeah. Any final things before we close? I know we're 5 over. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Apologies for some of the technical considerations and complications, I guess. Hopefully the recording turns out well. It may be in a few pieces and I may have to stitch it together, but hopefully they are legible. But thanks all for joining and your continued engagement. We need all of us in all of these roles.
Thank you so much for inviting us. Really was great to talk with everyone tonight. Appreciate everyone's energy and time on these issues.
And we look forward to learning from your insight and look forward to seeing your comments. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody.